Another election clerk in Colorado accused of breaching voting system security. As conspiracy theorists promise, they'll take over America's elections. We look at the continuing appeal of that big lie in our state and the debate in Colorado about whether to lie to your face or just behind your back. A new layer of emergency alerts for everyone who lives or works in Denver. They thought they were covered in a worst-case scenario. Then it got even more terrible when they learned what insurance won't cover. And with all the talk about wolves killing livestock, we got the bills for damage caused by other wildlife in Colorado. It is not just predators making a mess of the place. Next. Another elections clerk in Colorado is facing questions about a potential breach of their own voting systems. First, it was Mesa County Clerk Tina Peters, who became a right-wing star when she allowed conspiracy theorists access to her voting equipment. Now, Republican Elbert County Clerk Dallas Schroeder says he made a copy of his election hard drive. Democratic Secretary of State Jena Griswold has some questions about that. Questions that the clerk is not answering. This is about whether our elections can be trusted. So let's bring in politics guy Marshall Zellinger.
Back through here.
Republican Elbert County Clerk Dallas Schroeder gave us a tour of his election office in 2018. I went back there today, but he did not want to talk about what might be an election security concern.
What he did was take a copy of the hard drive of the voting equipment.
Democratic Secretary of State Jena Griswold found out there might be a security breach when Schroeder filed this affidavit as part of an election conspiracy lawsuit he's involved in against Griswold. I made a forensic image of everything on the election server, and I saved the image to a secure external hard drive. In the affidavit, he admitted he did this before the trusted build, which is a software update of the voting system.
At this point, we have no reason to believe that there was election security vulnerability for the 2021 election.
In May, Schroeder put out a news release after conducting a hand recount of the 2020 presidential election. His recount found 3 discrepancies. All human errors, not machine errors. Here's what he wrote in that release. I am proud to report these results and verify that Elbert County does it right. But in his lawsuit affidavit, he appears concerned that the Trusted Build software update destroyed the 2020 records that he already confirmed were good with a hand count.
There's claims running around that records required for retention under federal and state election law were deleted as a part of that process, and it's not true.
Last week, I talked with Matt Crane, head of the Colorado County Clerks Association, and he addressed this conspiracy that the Trusted Build software update somehow deletes records that are backed up anyway.
Every county clerk in the state can reconstruct the 2020 election right now if they needed to.
Griswold told me she's still in the information gathering stage and says it's too soon to say if this is similar to the security breach with Republican Mesa County Clerk Tina Peters.
So at this point, we cannot compare it to Mesa County because we simply do not know exactly what happened.
Schroeder wouldn't answer Griswold's questions. Maybe he would answer mine. I reached him by phone. He answered. I asked if he thinks he did anything wrong. He said, all of our comments will be going through the courts. Kyle, I asked the Secretary of State if she has any concerns about the equipment there. He only admitted to doing something before the software update. Maybe he didn't admit to something afterwards, if anything might have happened. And I asked, how can you be sure that that equipment or any equipment in the state is safe? And she tells me that even if something happened after the software update, there are redundancies that would reveal themselves before we have the election.
So, Marshall, this comes at a time when people who are spreading the conspiracy theory about rigged elections nationally, I think of President Trump's former advisor, Steve Bannon, are talking openly about their plan to take over the machinery of America's elections by getting people into clerks' positions to get into equipment.
I talked with Matt Crane about the idea of where should you get verified information, not misinformation, disinformation. And he said, talk to your clerk and recorder. And then I asked him, well, what if your clerk and recorder is someone like Republican Mesa County Clerk Tina Peters, who is under scrutiny for the security breach? And he paused and said, you got to talk with people who have been in the process. And that's the concern, is what if you have the people in the process that are in control of the equipment and perhaps even at the Secretary of State's office that might turn a blind eye to that? Luckily, there are the right people in place right now in Colorado, and you have the redundancies in place with a hand count, with the machine count, that you can verify something is up, perhaps, if one is off, and they're not off in Colorado.
Marshall, thank you. This is the falsehood that continues to churn through our politics. Over the weekend and today, several House Republicans in Colorado walked back their support last week of amendments in the House showing support for the participants in the events of January 6th and casting doubt on the 2020 presidential election. Representative Dan Woog of Erie says his vote was a mistake, that he didn't fully digest the issue. Representative Matt Soper of Delta says he couldn't read the amendment while participating remotely, and he regrets his vote. Representative Mark Baisley of Roxborough Park stood by his vote, but said that it was a mistake for Republicans to put it in writing. Colorado Republicans' debate over the big lie is now playing out in public as House members argue over whether it was a smart idea to go on the record questioning the validity of the 2020 election. There are Republicans who are eager to push the big lie about election security, and then there are others who just want to wink, wink, nudge, nudge to their supporters about it while not saying that they support the big lie in public. The gubernatorial candidate Heidi Ganahl telling her supporters that they need to win big enough that it can't be rigged, but yet not endorsing the lie of election rigging in public. I should say, Colorado also has some fact-based Republicans who know that our elections are not rigged. They, however, are outnumbered in positions of prominence and power in the party by the other two types. Those who want to shout the big lie from the rooftops, or those who want to whisper about it when unaffiliated voters aren't listening. For Colorado's voters who prefer not to be lied to, they will simply need to decide whether it matters if a candidate lies to your face or just behind your back. Good news is Denver is going to add a new layer of emergency alerts. The bad news is it's the same system that was widely criticized for how it operated during the Marshall Fire. So Denver has an Amber Alert system of automatic notifications based on your cell phone location. Denver is now adding an opt-in system, Everbridge, that's going to send out more detailed text and email notifications based on preset locations that you enter. The city of Denver explained this, saying that the federal government, FEMA, puts restrictions on how they can use that automatic alert system. They're adding Everbridge to follow up with more details. I went to the sign-up page today because I live and work in Denver. It took me about 2 minutes to sign up. We have that link in this story on 9news.com and on next social media pages. Coloradans who are preparing to rebuild after the Marshall Fire tell us that they are stunned by how high the cost estimates are and equally stunned to find out what insurance isn't going to cover. Here's our Steve Steger.
I don't recognize it. It hurts to see what it looks like now.
Charlotte Buck is looking at a large piece of her life savings in ashes. She's in her 70s, paid off her home 2 years ago.
But I never did think I would have the worst case scenario. And, you know, because we don't have hurricanes here. We don't have tornadoes.
What she did think, assume really, is that her insurance would cover whatever it costs to rebuild. Then she realized that cost has a cap.
I just don't know whether I will have enough money to rebuild an adequate house for this neighborhood.
What we sure know is that the coverage caps are not sufficient to build a replacement home of like kind and quality that people, certainly in my neighborhood, had.
Mark Wierenowski owns the slab 3 spray-painted addresses down.
We'll be underinsured to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Neither of them knows what it will actually cost for them to rebuild. They've just heard ballpark numbers, pushed higher because of supply chain issues and demand.
We're seeing numbers like $215 a square foot estimates from insurance, where builders are telling us $325 minimum. The town of Louisville said $350 to get it up to code.
So you have the magnitude of the Marshall Fire. You add to that supply chain and marketplace issues.
Carol Walker represents the insurance companies in Colorado. She says it's far too early to know what it's going to cost to rebuild.
If there are gaps in those coverages, fortunately we do have the FEMA individual assistance monies too.
Wierenowski wants lawmakers to push insurance companies to loosen caps on rebuilding costs.
Well, I don't see why every individual homeowner should have to fight that fight.
Walker with the Insurance Association says those kinds of guaranteed replacement policies have bankrupted insurance companies in the past.
If we have a non-capped policy that doesn't reflect that risk, or people aren't paying that premium for the cost to rebuild, that's when you put insurance in trouble. That's when you put insurers in a situation where they won't be able to pay out those claims.
Some of the people we talked to in Boulder County are also finding out about other missing pieces of coverage, things like debris removal and building code costs. Those are all covered in separate policies. Walker says the best thing you could do right now, try to schedule a yearly checkup with your insurance agent to make sure that you have enough coverage to pay to rebuild your home. And when you do that, Kyle, you want to try to factor in the current cost of construction. So maybe talk to the Builders Association, just see what that estimate for your area for the dollars per square foot might be.
Sound advice. Just feel for all the people who are in that situation. All right, Steve, thank you. Your Word of Thanks micro-giving campaigns passed the $8 million mark. Pretty amazing what a bunch of Coloradans can do with their $5 donations over about a year and a half. You passed the $8 million mark as you raised $45,000 last week to help the nonprofit Hope Communities hire additional navigators to help our new Afghan neighbors adjust to life and find success in the United States. Each week a new idea, and I would love to hear yours of a wonderful nonprofit that we can support together. Email next@9news.com or send me a tweet with the hashtag HeyNext. I promise I read each and every one. Ethics investigators find that a Colorado congressman used his staff to do favors and errands for his family. Colorado will be paying ranchers for animals killed by wolves. They would have to do a whole lot of damage to rack up the bill that bears have. And a story involving cancer that's also something that's not horrible. We'll take that next. I want to update you on a story that 9 News has been covering through the day. Aurora police say they've arrested a woman in connection with the fire that killed a 5-year-old at an apartment complex in Aurora early this morning. Apartments near Chambers and Iliff. They say the 37-year-old Alondra Mitchell is facing charges for murder, arson, and attempted murder. Police say what happened was some kind of domestic violence incident involving Mitchell and somebody else at that complex. And they say that she set something on fire, leading to the death of a 5-year-old boy. Congressional ethics investigators say Colorado's Republican Congressman Doug Lamborn used his staff to perform work and favors for his family. Getting a government job for his son, running errands for his wife. One staffer told investigators that Mrs. Lamborn said, "If Mama ain't happy, nobody's happy." Lamborn, who represents Colorado Springs, is accused of misusing official resources and soliciting or accepting improper gifts from subordinates in violation of House rules and federal law. The Office of Congressional Ethics Board voted unanimously to send that investigation to the House Ethics Committee. Along with using his taxpayer-paid employees to provide a staff to work for his family, Congressman Lamborn also investigators say, required his staff to give his family gifts, and not just any gifts. One staffer said they were required to check in with a high-ranking aide to make sure that the gifts for the Lamborns were expensive enough and that Mrs. Lamborn would like them. Congressman Lamborn told investigators that he and his family tried to comply with House rules. The mother from Douglas County, accused of plotting with fellow QAnon conspiracy theorists to kidnap her son out of the foster care system, is set to go on trial this spring. Cynthia Absug is accused of planning an armed raid that would take her son after he had been removed from her care after allegations of abuse. She fled Colorado in 2019 and was found in Montana. Absug's pleaded not guilty. QAnon, if you're not familiar, is a conspiracy theory that Democrats kidnap and drink the blood of children. Absug's case has been delayed a couple of times since it was originally booked for trial. She's now scheduled to go on trial May 16th.
Here we go again, another winter storm moving into Colorado overnight. That's when the snowfall begins, and unfortunately the heaviest snow arrives during that morning drive. So keep that in mind if you are going to be out on the roads early tomorrow getting the kids out the door or perhaps just even into work. Snowfall continues through the afternoon, and hopefully the evening drive will be a bit better. Tonight the clouds moving in ahead of this system. It's still parked across the inland northwest. As we go throughout that overnight period, 4:30 a.m. Ed Green will be here tracking the storm. That's when it begins. Continues through about the lunch hour. Still heavy pockets of snow in and around the foothills, and then everything kind of clearing out late tomorrow evening. How much stacks up? About 3 to 6 here in Denver, 3 inches east of I-25, some higher amounts the further west you go. Daytime highs staying in the 30s for us tomorrow. A brief break Wednesday before more snow on Thursday.
Lots been made recently of wolves killing livestock in Jackson County. Does not come close to the destruction done to ranches by bears, mountain lions, or even elk. There was no masking the excitement at the National Western Stock Show. The health department got dozens of mass complaints. Whether they did anything about it, next. The Entertainment Tonight guy always seems really jazzed to plug next. So you know Colorado compensates ranchers for lost livestock to predators. Now they're having to compensate ranchers for some of the wolves that have come in from Wyoming and have gone after some cattle. But Colorado has a long-standing program to compensate ranchers for damage done by all kinds of other animals other than wolves. In Jackson County, we know that wolves have become the focus as they've come down and killed a cow and a dog recently. The state reimburses ranchers for any animals killed by wolves, and the thought is if they do that, then ranchers won't shoot and kill the wolves, which is not allowed under the law. This is not a new system. In 2020, the state paid out nearly $500,000 in those damage claims, and that was below the 5-year average, actually, and more than half the damages were for livestock who were killed or injured. Bears. It's bears that have been messing up the joint. 81 claims of damage by bears in 2020, attacking sheep and cattle. Also beehives, which we thought was interesting. Bears also messed up irrigation equipment, fencing, and crops. Mountain lions cost the state at least $34,000 on 38 different claims in 2020. Sheep once again were the target, plus horses. Poor sheep can't catch a break. There were also an additional 11 sheep attack claims from 2020 where the state couldn't figure out if it was a lion or a bear. But how about elk out there busting stuff up? In 2020, there were 31 elk damage claims, almost $83,000. Most of the damage to crops, but there were also elk damaging irrigation equipment. And then mule deer cost the state a bit more than $6,000 in 2020. They went ham on corn and hay and apple trees and somebody's Christmas trees. The folks in charge of the National Western Stock Show made it clear that they were not interested in enforcing Denver's mask mandate. City Health Department says it received 30 different complaints about lack of mask wearing over the 2 weeks of the show. Denver Public Health had made it pretty clear that they were not interested in tangling with the powerful business and political and ag interests involved with the stock show. They said that when they received complaints, they would be dealing with them through education as opposed to enforcement. Celebrating the end of one of the worst times of your life. That sounds like something that isn't horrible. I'll have that and your feedback about this mess next. Celebrating 5 years cancer-free. Here's something that's not horrible. We're celebrating with Kristen this week. She just got her 5-year survivor pin from Rocky Mountain Cancer Center. 5 years since she beat non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. She asked for a shout out to her general practitioner, Dr. Heather Cribbs, and this guy too, oncologist Dr. Robert Jotty. Heather says because of them, she's celebrating her 21st wedding anniversary and watching her 14-year-old daughter and her 12-year-old son grow up. Not horrible at all. Heidi says, you're going to get a lot of noise for your big lie comments. Heidi says, I wanted to counter it with cheers. And Christian in Fort Collins writes in to say, Kyle, come on, your lighting is less than amateur. What's the deal? I'm going to confront that lighting guy the next time I see him in the mirror. See you next time.